We now pass to the review, or at least some of the litany of objection against the additional conjecture that neutrinos are physical particles in our space-time, as it is still nowadays as widely believed in the scientific community, by ignoring the objections I will present at this time. As it is very well known, the conjecture originated by a remark by Pauli that the spin is not preserved in the synthesis of the neutron in the core of a star from a proton and electron, and therefore Enrico Fermi suggested the hypothesis that there is, jointly with the synthesis of the neutron, there is the emission of a new hypothetical particle that he called neutrino, that in Italian means piccolo neutrone, so it means small neutron. At this moment, I also want to remember a word that I've used a number of times during this lecture, namely ethnic interest. Yes, this is a case also of ethnic interest. I am Italian, Enrico Fermi is Italian. Yes, I had for decades, and I still have, very serious ethnic interest on Enrico Fermi. Enrico Fermi is my mentor. I became a physicist because in his book he expressed doubts on the validity of quantum mechanics inside Masons in his work. He's my mentor. So, ladies and gentlemen, before having doubts on Enrico Fermi's view, believe me, I spent decades and decades of research. But finally, I reached a point in which I told myself, either I decided to remain a physicist. In this case, I must present the results of my research to the best of my capability and understanding without expectation that the others will necessarily agree. Or if I keep the results of my research secret just because of the power of the name Enrico Fermi, then it's best that I do something else and leave the field of research. Let's review some of the objections. There are many. First of all, the historical objective by both Pauli and Fermi was to salvage quantum mechanics. See, the problem is that in reality the neutrino hypothesis does not salvage quantum mechanics. No, for many reasons. The first reason is the following, that has been already indicated in other lectures, so I'll review very quickly, and this will be a subject of specific lectures later on level 3 and level 5. The reason is that the rest energy of the neutron is bigger than the sum of the rest energy of the proton and of the electron. Under those conditions, the Schrödinger equation becomes inconsistent. The initial equation of the Schrödinger equation becomes inconsistent. That means no physical solutions that everybody has been able. In any case, if you have doubts, remember the suggestion on lecture 1b. Try to solve the Schrödinger equation of the hydrogen atom, in which you change the sign of the potential from minus into plus, because you need energy, you miss energy. Fine. And then, but that's only part of it. Then the additional reason is that there is no possibility of providing the missing energy from the relative kinetic energy between the proton and the electron. This is something immediately argued because politically, because anything which is not has no technical paper published in referee journal is political. In other words, when they hear this objection that the Schrödinger equation is inconsistent because of the rest of energy of the neutron is bigger than the sum of the rest energy of the proton and the electron, immediately organized interest on Einstein and quantum mechanics. Oh, that's Dr. Santilli, assuming that they call me doctor. Santilli does not understand quantum mechanics. He does not understand particle physics. It's obvious there can be a relative kinetic energy. You have a proton and electron, very high energy. They have the missing energy, and therefore you solve this problem. Ladies and gentlemen, when this type of statements are proffered without publication in referee journals, it's politics. Indeed, and disqualified. These are the kind of derailment on the issue. Indeed, the cross-section of the proton and electrons, when they have a relative kinetic energy close to 1 million electron volts, is practically zero, is 10 to the minus 20 bar. So small that there is no possibility whatsoever that they can bond together and form the neutron. Then, but Santilli does not understand, because Enrico Fermi read the neutrino to the right. You can write also a particle to the left. But when you go from right to left, it becomes an antineutrino. Antineutrino. Ladies and gentlemen, the scattering, the cross-section of an antineutrino with the proton and electron is absolutely, positively, identically null. Besides, new theory of antimatter requires an anti-Hermitian conjugation for all characteristics. Therefore, not only of the energy that becomes negative for an antiparticle, it's not enough, but also of the unit. So an antineutrino, according to recent view, has a negative energy referred to a negative unit of energy, because in this case it's as causal as a positive unit referred to a positive energy. Okay, but in this case, being negative, this means in this version you need extra, in addition to 0.782 million electron volts, you need more energy because to supply the energy for the neutrino, etc., etc., etc. In conclusion, this the synthesis of the neutrons, ladies and gentlemen, was fundamentally left unaddressed, let alone unresolved. Was not even addressed by Enrico. It was not his intent. The hypothesis of the neutrino has no intention of reaching a structural model of them. But then there have been all sort of insufficiency. What is the historical birth of the hypothesis of the neutrino? Beta decay, because the energy of the electron in a beta decay has this type of bell-shaped curve, and so forth. People were saying for decades, still now, they claim, well, but where is the missing energy? Why the energy is not constant? The final nucleus is one. So there is a missing energy. So there is a mysterious particle which is no charge, we call a neutron, no charge and no mass, called neutrino, that carries the missing energy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this interpretation by Weishaupt, Enrico Fermi and others was correct for the knowledge of those pillars of our knowledge had at that time, namely quantum mechanics. Today, quantum mechanics is a beautiful history of the past century. And what is the novelty? The novelty is that the tacit assumption of this view is the assumption that you apply rigorously quantum mechanics. What does this mean? It means that the nucleus must necessarily be assumed as being point-like. Otherwise, quantum mechanics collapses. Quantum mechanics cannot represent, mathematically, physically, conceptual, cannot represent extended object. The moment the nucleus is assumed as to be a point, the hypothesis of the neutrino is unavoidable. So that's why I want to defend the founders of our knowledge, because on the basis of what they knew, the neutrino hypothesis was the only one plausible. The situation is now that we have almost 3/4 of a century of new knowledge. Once you represent the nucleus as extended, you immediately see that there is no room for the neutrino whatsoever. Why? Because the energy of the emitted electron depends on the orientation. Let's recall a few facts, because these things are adulterated in PhD courses, in papers, even the best journals, to adapt reality to a preferred ideology, always that of Einstein, ladies and gentlemen. Let us recall, nuclei are charged, yes or not? Yes, the nuclei are charged. What charge do they have? Positive. Unfortunately, they have positive charge. The electron is charged. Yes, it's charged. What charge? Negative, unfortunately. So what does this mean? Means that the positive charge of the nucleus attracts the negative charge of the spitted electron. But then the kinetic energy of the electron depends on the orientation of the emission. As elementary calculations done by first-year graduate students have done, and everybody can repeat, there is no energy whatsoever for the neutrino. So assuming that the neutrino exists, where is the energy? How is this created? What's the mechanism? They do not exist. So let's see then what happened. This was very well known. The moment, ladies and gentlemen, the moment the serious doubts on the existence of a neutrino emerged, immediately there was the granting of Nobel Prizes. Exactly the same for quarks. The moment serious doubts on quarks emerge, immediately Nobel Prizes, various, as we will see, unfortunately, for the Nobel Foundation and very unfortunately for mankind. Because the only way to maintain a structure that carries hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, they need credibility. Credibility, and the Nobel Prize provides such a credibility. But what happened? That the original hypothesis by Fermi of one neutrino and one antineutrino had to be extended because in the meantime of the SU3 symmetry and the so-called standard model. So it had first to be extended by the addition of the so-called to 3 neutrino, the electron, muon and tau neutrino, and 3 antineutrino. Fine. Even though the distinction among those 3 different neutrinos remain, to my knowledge at least, I still don't understand, careful, distinction that can be defined in our space-time so that it is physical. I repeat, I can accept a distinction provided I can measure it in a laboratory. To be measurable in a laboratory has to be defined in our space-time and not in an internal unitary symmetry. This extension turns out to be insufficient. They had to add the color. After adding the color, this additional conjecture turned out to be unverifiable and not in agreement with the experiments. So they had to add the conjecture that the neutrino have masses. All this plethora of different neutrinos have masses. This too turns out to be insufficient to maintain the dominance of preferred theory in particle physics. So they had to add an additional conjecture that is unverifiable in support of a preceding conjecture which has not been verified by experimental data, which the preceding conjecture was formulated for yet another preceding unverifiable conjecture, and so on and so on. But ladies and gentlemen, this is way beyond any level of credibility, yet the neutrino continues to be believed as existing in our laboratory, and in our laboratory it continues to have, as we speak, hundreds of millions of dollars. In Europe they are doing a test of detecting neutrino al Gran Sasso laboratory in Italy, neutrino that presumably have been shot at the CERN in Geneva, etc., etc. But ladies and gentlemen, let's meditate a moment. The credibility of this chain of individually unverifiable conjecture collapsed with the hypothesis that neutrinos have masses. They had to put the masses because they need parameters to adjust things, and the mass is a nice parameter. You fix it, you derive the mass from experimental data and claim the theory to be correct. This is a routine standard procedure. But the point in which, if we care about scientific democracy and decency in science, we have to meditate on the following point. The moment neutrinos have masses, the hypothesis that very large flux of neutrino, 10 to the 20 or so neutrino per square centimeter, 10 to the 20 the neutrino per square centimeter, can cross entire planets, entire star without collisions for a massive particles. Ladies and gentlemen, this is way beyond any limit of human decency, let alone scientific credibility. Massive particles, when they cross hyperdense nuclei or the core of a star, ladies and gentlemen, none of them will reach the other side. As a first-year graduate student can prove with mathematically, physically, and in any way required by rigor, but the academic community maintain the validity via Nobel Prizes, mutual support, and this type of manipulation. Let me mention briefly that when we will study the structure of the neutron, there is no need whatsoever of the neutrino, none. provided the proton is recognized for what it is, extended object. Again, under the knowledge that Enrico Fermi had at that time, the only knowledge was the birth of quantum mechanics had just been born, and particles were represented as being point. There was no other possibility for Enrico Fermi than represents the proton as a point. So when he studied the synthesis of the neutron from a proton and electrons, he had no other alternative than conjecturing the hypothesis of the neutrino. But now we know the enormous advancement of scientific knowledge has occurred since that time. And so the conjecture have to be re-examined on the basis of the new knowledge. In this case, the moment you admit that the proton is extended and hyperdense, immediately you see there is no need of there is no room for the neutrino. Why? Because the electron is compressed inside the proton, hyperdense proton, and the electrons being 2,000 times lighter than the proton is forced to rotate and with the same angular momentum of spin in this case as the proton itself. Otherwise, the electron has to move inside the proton again in a direction against the rotational motion of this hyperdense medium, which will have no physical sense whatsoever. In conclusion, you look at the numbers and you can see that the total angular momentum of the electron inside the proton is identically zero. The spin of the neutron is the spin of the proton. There is no possibility whatsoever for the neutrino. I can find none. I should indicate that as part of this, also as an illustration of this type of ethnic interest, in this case Italian interest on Enrico Fermi. When I published the paper in which in 1990, when I finally achieved the representation of all characteristics of the neutron in the synthesis from a proton and electron, my devotion for Enrico Fermi was so great that I simply did not have the courage of presenting what I'm telling you now, and therefore I presented the paper also by keeping the neutrino in all the equations. However, if you look at the equation, the presence of the neutrino makes no sense whatsoever. And only very few people have noticed this. I left it out of devotion because I did not have the courage of criticizing my mentor, which is Enrico Fermi, and because of Italian, in this case, Italian interest on a very famous Italian scientist, which I'm proud of. But later it became unavoidable. It became so obvious that there is no room of any type for the neutrino, so it had to be abandoned. If the neutrino does not exist, ladies and gentlemen, there are basically new energy, in this case double energy of a battery plus heat that can be indeed industrially attempted. In this case, more specifically, we're talking about the stimulated double beta decay of the molybdenum 142. That will decay first on the technetium, and then the technetium is naturally unstable, decays in the ruthenium. Notice at the beginning you have a light, natural, stable nucleus, and you end up with at the end a natural, light, and stable nucleus. There is no other radiation except the emission of two highly energetic electrons. This reaction is predicted by the so-called trigger in hadronic mechanics, namely a photon with a very, very specific resonating frequency. At this moment, immediately you see the attacks. Dr. Santilli does not understand physics. There are papers, look, physical review, volume, blah, blah, blah. It is true. There are several papers on this double beta decay, that it is very, very rare and absolutely is not admitted by quantum mechanics. It is obvious it is not admitted by quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics represents those three nuclei as points. And therefore, the notion of a resonating frequency for quantum mechanics and special relativistic quantum mechanics has no sense inside the point. You cannot have a resonance. However, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you represent this object as they are in the reality, extended, in this case the neutron, because this is hadronic energy, namely the mechanism is not inside the nucleus, it's inside one of the constituents of the nuclei, then the notion of resonance becomes possible because you have a volume, and therefore the stimulated decay is possible. But occurs, you have only one deviation from a quantum prediction at that resonating frequency. Everything else stays the same. Experimental verification is elementary. It can be done literally with a few $1,000s. I proposed this all over the world. Just the consideration of this new form of energy has been rejected by all physics departments all over the world, let alone the conduction of the experiment, just to disprove Santilli's idea. Forget about the moment they do the experiments, they are compromised with respect to organized cartel on Einstein and quantum mechanics, and they are immediately expelled. They will lose their job, as it has happened to a number of Alton Arp, my former colleagues at Harvard, was thrown out of Harvard before me because he had doubts on he presented experimental, he was an astrophysicist, he presented experimental evidence on quasar physically attached to a galaxy, yet the cosmological redshift were horrendously, enormously different among each other by a large factor. And this is a clear violation of special relativity. Alton Arp was requested to review his stand. He denied, thrown out of Harvard, and he left America forever, never to return to my knowledge, and went to the Max Planck's. I believe he's now an older gentleman. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper on the issue of the neutrino. Okay, to the best of my knowledge, without any expectations that colleagues will necessarily agree, and according to a variety of papers published in referee journals, in which I'm not an editor, include not only Foundation of Physics, but hyperfine interaction journals in China, in other countries. The neutrino does not exist as a physical particle in our space-time. And now, at this moment, there is the immediate attack on the experimental, so-called experimental evidence on the existence of the detection of the neutrino. That's where the motivation in which Nobel Prize has been granted, to maintain a theory that has no solid foundation. So one question that our group addressed is, okay, suppose that indeed it's true that the neutrino does not exist as a physical particle. Question: how about the experimental evidence? Is the experimental evidence necessarily to be trashed or not? The answer is not necessarily. The complexity of nature, ladies and gentlemen, is beyond our imagination. So let me address this issue very quickly to be treated technically in subsequent lectures. First of all, let's ask the question, where the energy missing in the synthesis of the neutron, close to 1 million electron volts, is coming from? Where is this energy coming from? You heard me before. If it is a relative kinetic energy between the proton and the electron, the neutron you cannot synthesize the neutron because the scattering cross-section is too horrendously small. So after studying this issue for a long time, the only answer that I could locate is that the energy originates from space, conceived as a universal medium with a very high energy density, namely the ether that we found from lecture 1A unavoidable for a quantitative representation of all electromagnetic waves, and not only those specific frequencies that do emit indeed a quantized effect. And so we go back to the ether as the frontier, in my opinion, the ultimate frontier of the third millennium. And in any case, I recommend you to meditate a moment on the following. Suppose that this missing energy originates from inside a star. Remember what happened in a star at the initiation of the most majestic phenomena in nature, one of the most majestic phenomena in nature, namely the birth of a star. When a star initiates producing light. From darkness, it produces light. Well, to achieve that, immediately you say, oh, the nuclear synthesis. It's not that simple. There is some politics there, ladies and gentlemen. No, because they intentionally miss, especially if done by experts, an intermediary step. Before a star can have nuclear fusion, has to synthesize the neutron. Without the star starts as being constituted purely by hydrogen. Hydrogen is proton and electrons. That's all. So to synthesize nuclear, you need the neutron. So the first synthesis in fusion, if you want, or synthesis, nuclear synthesis in a star, is that of the neutron. After you have neutron in a sufficient large number, then and only then you can have nuclear fusion producing energy such as the fusion of the deuteron, the fusion of the tritium, the creation of the helium, which are then, yes, they are all producing energy. Yes. But the very first step is that in order to produce light, star has to produce synthesized neutron in a very large number. I'm talking about for a medium star up to 10 to the 30 neutrons per second. Then numbers up to 50 neutrons per second are also been mentioned. That's why the stars are believed to create this an enormous flux of neutrons irradiating all over. That, as I indicated before, once the neutrons are admitted to have mass, cannot possibly be true. So, but let's go back to the issue. So let's assume that this missing energy originates from the interior of the star. But then, ladies and gentlemen, a star will never initiate producing light. Why? The very reason, because it will lose rather than produce 10 to the 30, 10 to the 50 millions electron volts per second. The star will lose rather than produce enormous amount of energy, will come instantaneously very, very cold, will contract because of coldness, not because of temperature. So there is no plausible interpretation on the origin of the missing energy in a way compatible with the various processes for the birth of the initiation of a star to produce light, as that it originates from the ether, conceived as a universal substratum necessary for the structure as well as propagation not only of electromagnetic waves but also elementary particles. Remember the discussion of that the electron is a pure oscillation of space, namely there is no little mass oscillating inside the electron. Electron is a point of the ether that oscillates. So this is, I want to mention this majestic phenomenon that and bring to the attention of colleagues that this phenomenon is indeed the birth of a star producing light is fundamentally unknown at this moment. We don't know the energy, where the energy is coming from. And this unknown is confirmed by the supernova. Please, meditate a moment on supernova. What are supernova? Supernova are that is an enormous explosion from millions and millions of light years, millions and millions of light years, not kilometers, light years away, that are visible by the naked eye. They are explosions of a dimension beyond our comprehension. Some of them, they've been measured to have the brilliance up to 1 billion times the brilliance of the sun. Question: where is this energy coming from? Immediately, orthodox organized interest, always the same problem. Organized interest of Einstein and quantum mechanics immediately will tell, they will come from the last fusion of the fusion of the heavy element inside the star. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. When I see this type of posturing, I ask for the calculation. Please show me the calculation. If I see that the calculation provide you a numerical representation of this enormous energy beyond our imagination, I will believe it. If not, I'm sorry, I'll consider it posturing for political reasons. It's very easy to prove that it is a posturing, ladies and gentlemen. There is no possibility whatsoever that we are talking about a star at the end of the life. It had been a star at the beginning, maybe there was some chance. But a star at the end of a life cannot possibly produce such an enormous amount of energy. Moreover, there is more. question, what is the end of this supernova? We all know it is a neutron star, a neutron star. So, ladies and gentlemen, this means that the last act of a star is the synthesis of a number of neutrons beyond our comprehension. And again, in that process, you need energy rather than producing energy. So the reality of a supernova is structurally, conceptually, quantitatively, scientifically, abyssally beyond what is nowadays politically considered for compliance with Einstein theory. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest. It's a question of honesty and dignity, not of science. This is an event of such a dimension in which the only serious scientific statement is that we do not know. We do not know. The moment you make a theory, at the end of a star, the last nuclear fusion produces energy, that is politics. It's always the same, never spoken, ladies and gentlemen. You have to dig it out. Never spoken. But what is if it is not intentional, what is the consequence? It's unavoidable. To maintain the validity of Einstein theories and quantum mechanics, even on such an event that goes immensely way beyond the condition of original conception by Einstein, thus confirming again and again and again my statement in defense of Einstein that the name Albert Einstein is the most abused name in the history of mankind. And let me close now with some positive note, and it is namely that when you look at the calculation, there's only possibility, namely that missing energy, therefore the missing spin, anything you want, originates from the ether. Then the question is, what is the mechanism? How can you do it? You cannot do it with a transversal process. No, necessarily you need a longitudinal action. Namely, so the transfer of energy from the ether to the proton and the electrons to synthesize the neutron is a longitudinal process for which I gave the name Neutrino. Neutrino, not as a particle, as a process, because I don't want to invent other replace an hypothetical particle, the neutrino, with another hypothetical particle, which is Neutrino. No, Neutrino is a process, not a particle. But then, ladies and gentlemen, this gives some hope of at least salvaging some of the experimental evidence available on processes that are induced by the conjecture of the existence of the neutrino. Maybe some of them can be salvaged. But what is most importantly, the moment we identify a longitudinal impulse, name something structurally beyond Maxwell equation, which, as you know, only admits transversal solution, so immensely beyond Einstein. Then what do we have? We have the possibility, in principle, mathematically already in existence today, which means one day may well become reality, of communications at a speed millions of times faster than the speed of light in vacuum. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we need for interstellar communication. When I remember I was at MIT, there was a report of the SETI for as you know, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. There was a nice scientist making very nice presentation. We were eating our sandwich during lunchtime, and I still remember this detail. And of course, the end result of the very, very nicely presented and very professionally presented. The end result: there is no evidence there is no evidence of So the conclusion of this speaker was there is no evidence of intelligent life. At that point, I could not control myself. I raised my hand and I said, "Please clarify." Absence of intelligent life here or there. And of course everybody was laughing. They liked my comment. I had to contain myself, however, to express what I intended to express, that the search of extraterrestrial life that the search of extraterrestrial life by using electromagnetic waves is exactly like it corresponds to the nowadays for us the communicating via the smoke signal using during the Indian in ancient times. This is the necessary equivalent, because the electromagnetic waves are too slow for interstellar communication. In any case, even the star Vega is millions of years older than us. If there is a civilization there, well, a civilization of millions of years more advanced than us technological, the idea that they're still communicating with electromagnetic wave, ladies and gentlemen, it's total to me it has no sense whatsoever. In any case, it is a realistic possibility, exists mathematically today. Therefore, as it has happened many other times, it could become a reality tomorrow. Finally, I want to mention that despite all the objection, the discreditation, etc., by organized interests of Einstein, I made this statement in other lecture. I want to make it again. Mankind will indeed reach the stars via Hubble, because we already have mathematical model, so-called isogeometric propulsion, nothing to do with Newtonian propulsion, way beyond, that predicts arbitrary speed to cover arbitrary distances without a fuel tank. Again, to reach the star, you need the heater. Without the heater, mankind will never reach the star. You need the heater as a medium of unlimited energy. The synthesis of the neutron, if seeded in a receptive environment in which with scientific democracy for qualified inquiry, the synthesis of the neutron can acquire an historical role as being the very, very first evidence of the passage of energy from the ether to matter. If that is done by nature for the neutron, maybe indeed if we allow scientific democracy in our society, then eventually mankind will also learn how to do it artificially. Once you do it so, then reaching the star, I can assure you, at arbitrary speed, without fuel tank, it will become, one day, will become a reality.